She ignored my signs, my boundaries, and my warnings. Then the sheriff arrived. I never thought a quiet morning on my Colorado ranch would turn into a fight over something my grandfather built with his own hands. But when an HOA president started driving her SUV across my private road every day and telling everyone it belonged to the community, I realized this was never just about a shortcut. It was about whether someone could ignore a property line because they had enough confidence and influence. I stopped arguing, started collecting evidence, and waited for the moment the truth had to speak for itself. Stay with me until the end to see what happened when the sheriff arrived at my gate. And if you enjoy real stories about land, rights, and standing your ground, consider subscribing for more HOA battles and ranch stories. Why did an HOA president think she could use a ranch road she never owned? At 5:36 in the morning, I heard an engine where there should have been silence. Not the low rumble of my old Ford pickup. Not the sound of a tractor warming up before sunrise. This was something different. Smooth, expensive, and completely out of place on my ranch. I stepped onto my porch and looked toward the north pasture. A black Range Rover was moving down my private access road. My first thought was that someone was lost. My second thought was that nobody gets lost on a road with a locked gate, private signs, and no reason to be there. I grabbed my jacket and walked toward the road. The tires rolled over the packed gravel my grandfather had laid down more than 50 years earlier. Dust rose behind the SUV as it passed the old cottonwood trees lining the fence. Then the vehicle stopped. The driver's window lowered, and I saw Victoria Caldwell. She looked completely comfortable, like she wasn't standing on someone else's land. Like this was just another morning commute. "Daniel," she said, almost casually, "you really need to do something about this gate." I looked past her at my road. "My gate?" She smiled. "Yes, Pine Ridge residents need access through here. This road saves everyone a lot of time." I stared at her for a moment, because I honestly thought I had misunderstood. "This is Mercer Ranch," I said. "This road is private property." Victoria tilted her head slightly. The same expression someone gives when they think they are explaining something obvious to a child. "Daniel, I know you feel attached to this place, but hundreds of families live right behind that ridge. They use this road every day. It makes sense for everyone." I looked toward the ridge. Behind the trees sat Pine Ridge Estates, the development that had appeared next to my family's ranch a few years earlier. A neighborhood of expensive homes, perfectly trimmed lawns, and people who had moved out here because they wanted the feeling of country living. But there was a difference between living next to the land and owning it. "My grandfather built this road," I said. "It runs through my property. It has always been private." Victoria sighed. "Daniel, it's just a dirt road." Those words bothered me more than they should have. Not because of the road, because of what she was really saying. That something built by my family, maintained by my family, and paid for by my family was somehow less important because it didn't look valuable to her. That was the mistake people made about ranch land. They saw dirt. They didn't see history. They didn't see the years of work behind every fence post, every drainage ditch, every mile of gravel. My grandfather bought this land decades ago when this part of Colorado was still mostly open country. He built the original access road because there was no easy way to reach the back fields. That road carried his equipment, his cattle trailers, and eventually my father's trucks. Now it carried someone else's SUV, someone who had never asked permission. Victoria rested her hand on the steering wheel. "Look, Daniel, I don't want this to become a problem between neighbors." I almost laughed, because from my perspective, the problem had already arrived. "I agree," I said. "So stop driving across my property." Her smile changed, only slightly, but I noticed. The friendly neighbor expression disappeared for half a second. "You really want to make this difficult?" "No," I said. "I want you to respect the boundary." She looked past me toward the ranch, then back at me. "You know, communities work because people cooperate," I nodded. "And properties work because people respect ownership." Neither of us said anything. The only sound was the Range Rover engine idling on my road. Then Victoria rolled up her window. "We'll talk again." She put the SUV into gear, and instead of turning around, she continued north, deeper into my ranch. I stepped forward. "Victoria." She stopped. "This road ends at my equipment area." She looked in the mirror. "I know." Then she kept driving. That was the moment I understood something. This was not confusion. This was not a misunderstanding. She knew exactly where she was. She knew exactly whose land she was on. And she believed she had the authority to be there anyway. I stood there watching the Range Rover disappear toward the back pasture. For almost 60 years, that road had carried my family's work. That morning, for the first time, it carried someone else's entitlement. I went back inside and made coffee. I wasn't angry enough to do something stupid. Ranch life teaches you patience. Weather changes slowly. Fences fail slowly. Problems usually reveal themselves one piece at a time, but problems also leave tracks. And Victoria Caldwell had just left a very clear one across my land. I thought that morning was the beginning of a neighbor dispute. I was wrong, because by the end of that week, I would discover Victoria Caldwell wasn't trying to borrow my road. She was trying to make everyone believe it had never belonged to me. 3 days after that first confrontation, I woke up before sunrise and found fresh tire tracks running along the southern entrance of Mercer Ranch. At first, I thought it might have been a delivery driver who took a wrong turn. Then I saw the pattern. The tracks weren't from a farm vehicle. They were from passenger tires, small SUVs, crossovers, family vehicles, cars that had no reason to be on my property. I followed the tracks north until I reached the section of road that crossed between my lower pasture and the creek line. The gravel was disturbed. The edges of the road were scattered with crushed grass where vehicles had moved too close to the fence. Someone had been driving through while I slept. And they weren't doing it once. They were doing it every day. I installed the first camera that afternoon. It wasn't anything complicated. Just a trail camera mounted near the fence line, pointed toward the road entrance. The same kind hunters use to watch wildlife movement. I wasn't trying to start a fight. I was trying to understand what I was dealing with. The next morning, the camera answered that question. 6:41 a.m. A silver SUV entered through the south gate. 6:48. A white crossover followed. 7:03. Another vehicle. Then, at 7:15, the black Range Rover appeared. Victoria Caldwell. She drove across my ranch road without slowing down. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Like she had already decided the conversation was over. Over the next week, the footage showed the same pattern. Every morning, more vehicles, more tire tracks, more dust settling over the grass near the road. I drove to Pine Ridge Estates that Saturday afternoon. Victoria answered the door wearing a perfectly pressed jacket, holding a coffee cup in one hand. She looked surprised to see me, not concerned. Surprised. "Daniel," she said, "is something wrong?" I almost admired how easily she said it, as if she had no idea what was happening. "Your residents are driving across my property every morning." She leaned against the doorframe. "Oh, that. Like it was a minor inconvenience." "Yes, that." She sighed. "Daniel, we already talked about this. People are using an existing access route." "It is not an access route. It has been used. By people who don't have permission." Victoria smiled. "You keep saying that word." "What word?" "Permission." She looked toward the neighborhood behind her. "Sometimes communities have to work together." I looked back at her. "Communities don't get to work together by taking something that belongs to someone else." Her expression hardened, only for a second. Then she recovered. "You know, I think you're being emotional about this." That sentence stayed with me, because people who want something from you often call you emotional when you refuse to give it to them. "I am protecting my property," I said. Victoria stepped outside. Daniel, hundreds of people live here now. Families, children, people who have jobs. This road makes their lives easier. And my cattle? She paused. My fields? No answer. The damage to my pasture? She looked down the driveway. It's just grass. That was when I understood. Victoria didn't see the ranch. She saw unused space, a blank line on a map waiting for someone with enough confidence to claim it. I went home and posted private property signs at every entrance. Large signs, clear words. Private property, no unauthorized access. I placed one at the south gate, one near the northern fence line, and two along the road itself. There was no confusion, no ambiguity. Anyone who saw them knew exactly what they meant. The next morning, the vehicles came anyway. They drove past the signs like they were decorations. That afternoon, I found the southern sign lying beside the road. The bolts had been removed cleanly. Not knocked down, not damaged, removed. Someone had taken the time to unscrew it. The following morning, the northern sign was gone too. I stood there holding the empty mounting bracket, staring at the holes left behind. This wasn't about a shortcut anymore. This was a message. Victoria was telling me that my boundaries only mattered if she agreed with them. I replaced the signs. This time I added more cameras, and I waited. 2 days later, the footage came in. I watched it once, then again, then a third time. The person in the video wore a jacket and a baseball cap, trying to hide their face, but they didn't hide enough. The timestamp read 5:12 a.m. The vehicle behind them was unmistakable. A black Range Rover. Victoria Caldwell stepped onto my property before sunrise. She looked around. Then she removed my sign. She loaded it into her vehicle and she drove away. I sat there watching the screen in silence, because the person who had spent weeks talking about community standards had just crossed the clearest boundary there was, a private property line. I didn't call her. I didn't confront her. I didn't drive to Pine Ridge Estates. I printed every image, every timestamp, every vehicle record. I started a file. At the top of the folder, I wrote one sentence: Mercer Ranch Access Road, unauthorized use. That was the moment the fight changed. Before that, it was my word against hers. After that, it became evidence. But what I didn't know yet was that Victoria wasn't removing signs because she wanted a shortcut. She was removing them because she knew exactly what those signs represented. Proof that she had never owned my road. That realization changed the way I looked at Victoria Caldwell. Before that morning, I still believed there was a chance this was just arrogance, a misunderstanding that had gone too far, a person who had convinced herself she was helping and refused to admit she was wrong. But people who accidentally cross a boundary usually stop when they see the boundary. Victoria crossed it again and again. So I stopped trying to convince her. I started documenting everything. The first thing I did was build a timeline. Every vehicle, every entry, every time. I printed photographs from the trail cameras and placed them into the folder sitting on my kitchen table. The same table where my grandfather had once spread out property maps and farm records when I was a kid. Back then, those documents were just paper. Now they were protection. The second thing I did was install more cameras. Not because I wanted revenge, because I knew the truth was going to matter more than my opinion. A week later, I had enough evidence to see the pattern clearly. Pine Ridge residents weren't randomly discovering my road. They were being encouraged. The vehicles came almost every morning between 6:30 and 8 o'clock. The same route, the same entrance, the same assumption that nobody would stop them. And every time someone entered Mercer Ranch, Victoria's message to the neighborhood was the same: community access. That phrase appeared everywhere, on HOA posts, in neighborhood discussions, in messages between residents. She never called it my road. She never called it private property, because those words would have forced people to confront reality. Instead, she created a different version, a version where my land was just an obstacle. One evening, I checked the Pine Ridge community page. Victoria had posted an update. Reminder to residents. Please continue using the back route responsibly. Some confusion has occurred, but we are working to preserve access that benefits the entire community. The post had dozens of comments. People thanking her. People saying they appreciated her leadership. People talking about how much time the shortcut saved them. Then I saw one comment from someone named Greg Wallace. "Isn't that road on private property?" Victoria responded within minutes. "Greg, the road has been used by the surrounding community for years. We are simply protecting established access." I stared at that sentence, because it was carefully written. Not a direct lie, not a direct claim of ownership. Just enough uncertainty to make people believe there was something there. That was how Victoria operated. She didn't need everyone to know the truth. She only needed enough people to believe her version. The next morning, I called Rachel Morgan. I had heard her name from another ranch owner who had gone through an access dispute a few years earlier. She was the kind of attorney people recommended when emotions were high, but the facts mattered more. We met at my ranch office. I placed the folder on the desk. Rachel opened it. She didn't react immediately. She looked through the photographs, then the timestamps, then the screenshots from Victoria's posts. After 20 minutes, she looked up. "Daniel, how long has this been happening?" "About 3 weeks since the traffic started. Longer if you count the pressure." "Pressure?" "She first asked to use the road. I said no. After that, everything changed." Rachel leaned back. "Did you ever give permission, even temporarily?" "No." "Did your family ever allow public use?" "No." "Did you sign any agreement with Pine Ridge?" "No." She nodded slowly. "Good." I looked at her. "Good?" "Because right now, your biggest advantage is that you never gave them something they can twist." She pointed at the folder. "This isn't a road dispute yet. It's a property rights dispute. And the difference matters." She explained that land fights were rarely decided by who was louder. They were decided by records, ownership documents, surveys, recorded agreements, boundaries, evidence. Exactly the things Victoria seemed to believe did not matter. But Rachel also warned me. "Daniel, people like this don't usually stop when they're challenged." "I know. They escalate." I looked out the window toward the road. The same road Victoria had driven across like it belonged to her. "Then we'll be ready." Rachel asked me one more question. "Why do you think she wants this road so badly?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. At least I thought I didn't. But 2 days later, Rachel called me after reviewing county records. Her voice was different. Not worried, focused. "Daniel, I found something." I sat down. "What?" "Before I tell you, I need you to understand something. This changes the entire situation." I looked toward the ranch road outside my window. "What did you find?" A pause. Then Rachel said, "Pine Ridge Estates was never just trying to save their commute." I waited. They were planning something bigger. And for the first time since Victoria Caldwell drove onto my property, I realized the road itself might not have been the thing she wanted. It might have been the thing standing in the way of what she really planned to take. Rachel Morgan called me back the next morning. "Daniel, I need you to come to my office." The way she said it told me this wasn't a casual conversation. I drove into town with the folder sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The same folder that started with a few photographs of tire tracks and missing signs had become something much larger. A record of every time Victoria Caldwell believed my property belonged to her. Rachel had documents spread across her desk when I arrived. County maps, development plans, survey records, property filings. She didn't waste time. "Do you know why Pine Ridge Estates chose that location?" I shook my head. "Because the land was available." Rachel nodded. "Partly, but not completely." She slid a map across the desk. It showed Pine Ridge Estates, the surrounding properties, and Mercer Ranch. Then she pointed to the road. "Your road is the shortest route from the subdivision to County Road 118. "I know." No, Daniel, look closer. I leaned forward. The line wasn't just marked as a road. It was positioned directly between Pine Ridge's current homes and their planned expansion area. Rachel pointed to another section of the map. This is Phase 2. I looked at the outlined area. More homes, more streets, more development. How many? 70 additional lots. I stared at the page. And they need my road. Rachel nodded. More than that. They need access through your property. Suddenly, every conversation with Victoria made more sense. The morning she told me hundreds of families needed the shortcut. The way she dismissed my concerns. The way she acted like my refusal was a temporary inconvenience. She wasn't trying to make life easier for current residents. She was trying to solve a problem for future construction. Rachel opened another document. This is a marketing brochure from a planning presentation. She turned it toward me. At the bottom of the page were words that made my stomach tighten. Future residents will enjoy enhanced ranch-side access and improved connectivity. I read the sentence twice. Ranch-side access, not public access, not existing access, ranch-side access. They were selling the idea of my land before they had any right to use it. Who approved this? I asked. Rachel looked at the paperwork. That's what we're going to find out. She had already contacted Michael Turner, a retired county surveyor who had worked on land records in the area for decades. 2 days later, Michael met us at the county records office. He was the kind of man who carried old documents in a leather folder instead of trusting everything to a computer. He looked over the maps quietly. Then he removed his glasses. Daniel, I remember this property. You do? He nodded. Your grandfather's road was documented when I was still working county surveys. He pulled out a copy of an older record. The paper was faded, but the markings were clear. Mercer Ranch Private Access Road. No public easement, no shared access, no right-of-way. Michael tapped the page. This was never a community road. Rachel looked at him. Could someone misunderstand this? Michael shook his head. No. His answer was immediate. Not if they looked. That sentence mattered, because Victoria's entire argument depended on people believing nobody had checked. But someone had checked. The records had always been there. The truth had always existed. It just hadn't been convenient. Then Michael found something else. A developer agreement from when Pine Ridge Estates purchased the land years earlier. The agreement included a section acknowledging nearby private properties. One paragraph stopped us. The developer acknowledged that surrounding parcels contained private roads and improvements, and that no access rights were created through subdivision development. Rachel looked up from the document. There it is. I knew what she meant. Victoria wasn't fighting because the records were unclear. She was fighting because the records were clear. Pine Ridge knew. The developer knew. Someone had decided the easiest solution was to convince me to give up what they couldn't legally take. When I returned home that evening, I drove slowly down the old road. The same road Victoria called a shortcut. But now I saw something different. I saw the reason behind every tire track, every missing sign, every conversation where she acted like my answer didn't matter. This was never about convenience. It was about control. The next morning, Victoria posted another message in the Pine Ridge community group. Some residents have expressed concerns about unnecessary restrictions affecting community movement. We are continuing discussions to preserve access that benefits everyone. I read it carefully. She still avoided saying my name. She still avoided saying my road, because she knew the truth sounded different. My road, my property, my permission. Those words would change the entire conversation. That afternoon, Rachel called again. Daniel, there's one more thing. What now? We found financial documents connected to Phase 2. I waited. Investors were already told access would be available. I looked toward the ranch road through the window. The sun was dropping behind the ridge. For generations, that road had led my family home. Now someone else had drawn a line through it on a development map. Rachel's voice became quieter. Daniel, Victoria isn't trying to get permission. Then what is she trying to do? A pause. Then she answered. She's trying to make permission irrelevant. And that was the moment I understood the real fight. She didn't want my road. She wanted everyone to believe she had already won the right to use it. That was the part that stayed with me. Because once you understand what someone is really after, their actions stop looking random. Victoria Caldwell had spent months acting like this was about convenience. A shorter drive, a better route, a community benefit. But the documents Rachel Morgan uncovered told a different story. The road was not the goal. The road was the key. A week after we found the Phase 2 plans, Rachel and I sat in her office reviewing everything again. The development maps, the marketing materials, the investor documents, the HOA communications. Every piece connected to the same idea. Pine Ridge Estates wanted to expand. And every expansion plan depended on something they did not own. Mercer Ranch access. Rachel pointed to a section of the investor presentation. They are not just telling homeowners this road might be available. She tapped the page. They are presenting it as part of the future value of the development. I read the paragraph carefully. Future residents will benefit from improved access and enhanced connectivity through neighboring land corridors. Neighboring land corridors. Another phrase designed to avoid saying the truth. My land. My road. My permission. I looked at Rachel. Can they legally sell something they don't own? She shook her head. No, but that doesn't mean people don't try. That was the most frustrating part. Victoria wasn't acting like someone who misunderstood the situation. She was acting like someone who believed confidence could replace ownership. And for a while it worked. People believed her because she had a title. HOA president, community leader, the person who sent newsletters and organized meetings. But a title did not change a property line. A title did not create an easement. A title did not turn my grandfather's road into a neighborhood entrance. I drove home that evening with a different feeling. Not anger, not anymore. Clarity. The fight was no longer about convincing Victoria to be reasonable. It was about making sure the truth was impossible to ignore. The next morning, I received another message from Pine Ridge Estates. This time it wasn't from Victoria directly. It was a formal letter from the HOA board. It requested a meeting to resolve ongoing access concerns. Rachel read it before I responded. Do you want to meet with them? I thought about it. A few months earlier, I probably would have. I would have sat across from Victoria and explained the damage, the traffic, the fences, the disrespect. But now I understood something. Victoria already knew. She just didn't care. Yes, I said. Rachel looked surprised. You're sure? Yes, but not because I think she'll change her mind. Then why? Because I want to hear what she says when she knows we have the records. The meeting took place at a small conference room near the county offices. Victoria arrived with 2 HOA board members. She walked in carrying a folder. The same kind of folder people carry when they want to look official. She smiled. Daniel, I'm glad we're finally having a productive conversation. I placed my own folder on the table. I agree. She noticed it. Her expression changed slightly. Only for a second. But I saw it. She wasn't expecting me to come prepared. Victoria opened the meeting. She talked about growth, community needs, property values, cooperation. Every word sounded reasonable, until you looked at what she was asking for. You need to understand, she said. This road serves more than just one person now. I looked at her. No, this road serves my property. She leaned forward. Daniel, nobody wants conflict. I almost smiled, because that sentence had become the favorite phrase of people who had already created conflict. I agree, I said. So why are your residents still driving across my land? One of the board members looked down. Victoria didn't answer. Instead, she opened her folder. We believe there are historical usage rights that need to be reviewed. There it was, the new argument. Not ownership, not permission, historical usage. Rachel had warned me they would eventually move in this direction. Because when someone cannot prove they own something, they often try to prove they deserve access to it. I placed a copy of the original survey on the table. The county records already reviewed this. Victoria glanced at the paper, but didn't pick it up. The situation has changed. The law hasn't. Her jaw tightened. For the first time, the polite version of Victoria disappeared. You are making this harder than it needs to be. I looked at her. No. I'm making sure it stays what it has always been. A private road. A quiet silence filled the room. Then Victoria gathered her papers. This isn't over. I knew she meant it as a threat. But I heard something else. Desperation. Because people who are winning rarely need to say that. After the meeting, Rachel and I walked outside. You saw it too, didn't you? She asked. Saw what? She knows. I looked back at the building. She knows the records are against her. Rachel nodded. And now she has to decide whether to stop. I already knew the answer. Victoria Caldwell had spent too much time convincing everyone she was right. People like that don't usually walk away when the facts appear. They push harder. And she did. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my house. Not a request. Not an invitation. A demand. It came on Pine Ridge Estates' HOA letterhead. The first line read, Notice of Community Access Requirement. I read it once. Then again. Victoria Caldwell was ordering me to remove my gate, to restore access, to stop restricting what she called a community route. At the bottom was her signature, her official title, HOA President. She had taken the one thing Rachel and I needed. She had put her belief in her own authority onto paper. I placed the letter back into the folder. And for the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. Because Victoria Caldwell had finally made her biggest mistake. She stopped pretending, and she left proof. For months, Victoria Caldwell had hidden behind careful language. She never said she owned my road. She said the community needed access. She never said she was taking my property. She said she was protecting neighborhood connectivity. She never admitted she had no authority. She simply acted like authority was something she could create by repeating it enough times. But that changed the day the letter arrived. The envelope was thick white paper with the Pine Ridge Estates logo printed across the top. Official, professional, designed to look like something that carried weight. I opened it at my kitchen table while the morning light came through the window. The first sentence told me everything I needed to know. Notice of Community Access Requirement. I read the page slowly. Victoria Caldwell, acting in her capacity as president of Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, demanded that I remove the gate blocking access to the Mercer Ranch Road. She claimed the road had become an established community route. She claimed restricting access was interfering with neighborhood rights. She gave me 14 days to comply. 14 days. Like she was writing to someone who lived inside her HOA. Like my property existed under her rules. I placed the letter on the table and just looked at it. Not because I was shocked, because I was disappointed. A part of me still hoped Victoria would eventually realize the difference between influence and authority. Instead, she had chosen to put her mistake on official letterhead. I called Rachel Morgan. She arrived that afternoon. She picked up the letter, read it once, then placed it back down. Daniel, this is exactly what we needed. I looked at her. You're happy she threatened me? No, she shook her head. I'm happy she documented her position. Rachel pointed to the signature at the bottom. Before this letter, Victoria could claim she was just trying to solve a neighborhood problem. She could say residents misunderstood. She could say people acted independently. She tapped the page. Now she has officially represented that the HOA has authority over land it does not own. That was the difference. A conversation could disappear. A memory could be questioned. A written demand with a signature was something else. It became evidence. Rachel pulled out her notebook. We need to respond carefully. How? Not with anger. She looked at me. With facts. That was Rachel's approach from the beginning. No threats, no emotional arguments, no public fights, just records. She drafted a response explaining, Mercer Ranch was privately owned. The access road was never transferred or granted as an easement. Pine Ridge Estates had no authority over the property. Continued unauthorized use would be documented. She attached copies of the original survey records, the developer agreement, the county filings, everything Victoria had ignored. Then we sent it by certified mail, the same way she had sent her demand. A few days later, I received confirmation. Victoria had signed for it. She had received the exact documents proving she was wrong, and she knew it. But instead of stopping, she escalated. That weekend, Pine Ridge held a community meeting. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. Someone sent me a recording afterward. Victoria stood in front of dozens of homeowners explaining the situation. She described it as a misunderstanding caused by one property owner refusing to cooperate. She talked about community needs, property values, future growth. She never mentioned the deed. She never mentioned the survey. She never mentioned that the developer had already acknowledged the road was private, because facts were harder to sell than frustration. Then she made the mistake Rachel was waiting for. She told the homeowners, "We have every legal right to continue using that road." That sentence changed everything, because now it wasn't just an assumption. It was a claim that could be tested. Rachel listened to the recording twice. Then she looked at me. She's committing to this position publicly. Meaning? Meaning she can't later say she was confused. The next morning, Rachel contacted Michael Turner. They reviewed every document again. Michael compared the old county maps with the current Pine Ridge development plans. Then he found something else. A notation in the original subdivision approval documents. A warning. The developer had been required to notify Pine Ridge buyers that surrounding properties contained private roads and restricted access areas. The information had been available from the beginning. The HOA wasn't discovering a hidden road. They were ignoring a known boundary. Victoria had built her entire argument around something that the records had already rejected. I sat in Michael's office looking at those documents. For the first time, the situation felt different. Not easier, more serious. Because now we knew this wasn't a simple disagreement between neighbors. This was a deliberate push to make private land function like public property. And Victoria still believed she could win by exhausting me. But she didn't understand something. Every demand, every email, every public statement, every vehicle crossing my land, every time she told people the road belonged to them. She was creating a record that would eventually tell the story without her. A few days later, Rachel called again. "Daniel, we need to talk." I heard something in her voice. Not concern, preparation. "What happened?" "We found someone inside Pine Ridge who wants to speak with you." I was quiet. "Who?" "Linda Parker, the HOA treasurer, the person who had watched Victoria make these decisions from inside the board." Rachel continued. "She says she has documents." I looked toward the ranch road outside my window. The same road Victoria wanted. The same road she claimed was already hers. But now someone from inside her own organization was ready to explain why Victoria had been fighting so hard to take it. And if Linda was telling the truth, the letter on my kitchen table was not Victoria's strongest mistake. It was only the beginning. I met Linda Parker away from Pine Ridge Estates. Not because we were hiding, because she wanted to talk without worrying who was listening. She chose a small diner outside town, the kind of place where ranchers, truck drivers, and county workers stopped for coffee before the day started. When she walked in, she looked exhausted. Not angry, not dramatic, just tired. The kind of tired people get when they have spent too long watching something wrong happen and wondering when they should finally speak. She sat across from me and placed a small folder on the table. "I need you to understand something, Daniel," she said. "I never thought it would get this far." I looked at the folder. "What is it?" Everything Victoria didn't want anyone outside the board to see. Linda had been the HOA treasurer at Pine Ridge Estates since shortly after the community was built. She handled budgets, meeting records, financial reports. She had seen every discussion about the road. At first, she said, she believed Victoria was just trying to improve the neighborhood, a shorter route, better convenience, a way to help residents. But over time, the conversations changed. "The road stopped being about residents," Linda said. "What did it become?" She looked down. A selling point. She opened the folder. Inside were copies of HOA meeting notes, internal emails, and planning documents. Rachel Morgan reviewed everything as Linda explained. The first document was a board meeting summary. A discussion about Phase 2 expansion. A note beside the development plans caught my attention. Access issue must be resolved before final investor presentation. Rachel looked at me. There it is. The phrase was simple, but it changed everything. Access issue. Not community concern, not public road, not established route. An issue they knew existed. Linda continued. Victoria told the board that once residents started using the road regularly, it would become harder for Daniel to stop them. I stared at her. She said that? Linda nodded. Those were almost her exact words. For months, I had been trying to understand why Victoria acted like my refusal was temporary. Now I knew. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was trying to create a situation where permission no longer mattered. Rachel picked up another document. What is this? Linda hesitated. That is the investor presentation. The same one Rachel had already found pieces of. But this version contained something different. A handwritten note from Victoria. Rachel read it carefully. Then her expression changed. What does it say? She turned the page toward me. Secure Mercer access before next phase approval. 3 words. Secure Mercer access. Not negotiate. Not request. Secure. The word carried a different meaning. It suggested the decision had already been made. The only remaining question was how to make it happen. I sat there quietly, because that was the moment the entire story came together. The missing signs, the daily traffic, the public statements, the demand letter. Victoria had not been improvising. She had been following a plan. Rachel continued reviewing the documents. Then she found something even more important. A series of emails between Victoria and the development consultant. One message from Victoria said, "Once residents normalize using the route, we can argue the community depends on it." Rachel placed the paper down. Daniel, this is significant. Why? Because this proves intent. That word mattered. Intent. There was a difference between someone being wrong and someone knowing they were wrong. Victoria had received the documents. She had been warned. She knew the road was private, and she continued anyway. Linda looked at me. I should have said something earlier. I shook my head. You said something when it mattered. She looked toward the window. I was afraid. Of Victoria? She nodded. She has a lot of influence in that neighborhood. People listen to her. That was the strange thing about power. Sometimes it wasn't based on law. Sometimes it was based on confidence. Victoria had convinced people she was in control because she acted like she was. But confidence could not rewrite a deed. A title could not change a boundary. And an HOA president could not create ownership by sending enough letters. Rachel gathered the documents. This changes our strategy. How? Before, we were proving Victoria was wrong. She looked at the folder. Now we're proving she knew she was wrong. That was a much bigger difference. The next morning, Rachel sent a formal notice to Victoria and the Pine Ridge Board. It included the original survey, the developer agreement, the private road documentation, and a demand that all unauthorized use stop immediately. For the first time, Victoria received a message she could not ignore. Not from a frustrated ranch owner, from a legal team. Her response came within hours. She rejected the allegations. She called Linda's documents misinterpreted internal discussions. She called my evidence an attempt to create conflict. But one thing stood out. She did not deny the documents existed. She did not deny the meetings. She did not deny the expansion plans. Because she couldn't. The truth was already outside the walls of Pine Ridge. That evening, I stood by the ranch gate and watched another vehicle turn around after seeing the private property signs. A small moment. But it mattered, because for the first time in months, the road felt like mine again. Then my phone rang. Rachel, her voice was serious. Daniel, we have a problem. I looked toward the driveway. What happened? Victoria knows Linda gave us the documents. I felt my stomach tighten. How? Someone told her. A pause. She's calling an emergency HOA meeting. For what? Rachel answered quietly. She says she's going to open the road permanently before this goes any further. I looked at the locked gate. The same gate Victoria believed was temporary. The same gate she believed she could force open through pressure. But this time, she wasn't just making statements. She was preparing to act. And she had no idea we were ready. The emergency HOA meeting happened on a Thursday night. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. By then, Victoria Caldwell had already shown everyone exactly who she was. She stood in front of the Pine Ridge Estates homeowners and explained that the community was facing an access crisis. That was her phrase, an access crisis. Not a property dispute. Not an unauthorized use issue. Not a legal problem caused by the HOA. A crisis. Victoria was good at choosing words that made people feel something before they understood what was happening. She told residents that one ranch owner was preventing progress. She told them the road had become essential. She told them delays could affect future property values. What she did not tell them was that the road belonged to someone else. She did not tell them the developer agreement proved it. She did not tell them her own treasurer had provided documents showing the HOA knew the truth. And she definitely did not tell them that Rachel Morgan was already preparing the legal response. The next morning, Linda called me. Her voice was quiet. Daniel, she is moving forward. I was standing near the ranch gate when she said it. What does that mean? It means she believes she can create a situation before anyone can stop her. I looked down the road. The same road my grandfather built. The same road Victoria wanted to turn into a subdivision entrance. What is she planning? Linda hesitated. She told the board that residents are going to begin using the road as an established access route. I understood immediately. She wasn't waiting for a court. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was trying to create another argument. If enough people used the road, she could later claim the community depended on it. Rachel had warned me about this possibility. Make the situation seem permanent. Then argue that changing it would be unreasonable. It was a strategy built on one assumption, that nobody would stop them. But this time we were prepared. Rachel arrived at my ranch before sunrise. She brought copies of everything, the deed, the survey records, the developer agreement, Linda's documents, Victoria's signed demand letter, the entire history of the dispute. She looked at the closed gate. Today is not about winning an argument. I know. Today is about creating a clear record. I nodded. That was the difference between emotion and strategy. Victoria wanted a confrontation. We wanted facts. At 6:18 a.m., the first vehicle appeared. A white pickup truck, then another, then a black SUV. Behind them came a contractor vehicle. I recognized the Pine Ridge Estates logo on the door. They weren't just residents anymore. They had brought equipment. They had brought a plan. Then Victoria arrived. Black Range Rover. Same vehicle, same confidence. She parked directly in front of the gate and stepped out. There were several homeowners behind her. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked certain they were doing the right thing. That was the dangerous part. Most people weren't trying to take my land. They were following someone who convinced them they had a right to. Victoria walked toward the gate. Daniel. I stood there holding the folder. Victoria. She looked at Rachel, then at the documents in my hand. Her expression changed slightly. You brought an attorney? I brought the fact. She smiled. Daniel, this doesn't need to become complicated. I almost couldn't believe she said that. After months of vehicles crossing my property, after removing my signs, after sending me a legal demand, she still believed I was the one making things complicated. You are standing at my private gate with HOA vehicles and contractors. She looked around. We are restoring access that has been used by the community. Rachel stepped forward. Victoria, you have been notified in writing that this road is private property. Victoria looked at her. We disagree. Rachel nodded. I know. Then she handed Victoria a copy of the documents. That is why we brought them. Victoria didn't take them. I don't need another copy of something you think proves your point. Rachel's expression stayed calm. That is exactly the problem. You think this is a matter of opinion. The homeowners behind Victoria became quieter because the conversation had changed. This was no longer a community meeting. It was no longer a Facebook argument. It was a property dispute with documents on one side and assumptions on the other. Victoria turned back toward the vehicles. Open the gate. Nobody moved. That surprised her. For the first time, I saw uncertainty. The contractors looked at each other. They were expecting authority. They were not expecting questions. Then Victoria reached for her phone. Fine. She stepped away. You leave me no choice. She made a call. A few minutes later, a sheriff's vehicle appeared at the end of the road. Sheriff Thomas Hayes stepped out. The same sheriff who had known my family for years. The same sheriff who had told me from the beginning that facts mattered. Victoria walked toward him immediately. Thank goodness you're here. She pointed toward me. He is blocking a community road. Sheriff Hayes looked at her, then at me, then at the gate. He did not answer right away. That silence bothered Victoria because she was used to people reacting to her confidence. The sheriff walked slowly toward the gate. He looked at the private property sign, then at the vehicles, then back at Victoria. Finally, he asked one question. Who owns the road? Nobody spoke. The wind moved through the grass beside the fence. The contractors stopped talking. The homeowners stopped whispering, because everyone understood what that question meant. Not who uses it, not who wants it, not who benefits from it, who owns it. Victoria crossed her arms. Everyone knows this has been community access. Sheriff Hayes looked at her. That wasn't my question. He turned toward me. Daniel, show me what you have. I opened the folder and handed him the first document. The deed, then the survey, then the developer agreement, then Victoria's own signed letter. One page after another. The same documents Victoria had ignored. The same documents that had been waiting for this moment. Sheriff Hayes read quietly, and Victoria watched. For the first time since this began, she wasn't controlling the conversation. She was waiting for someone else to decide whether she was right. And that was something she had never prepared for. Because she believed the gate was the obstacle. She believed the road was the battle. But standing there with the sheriff reading the truth, she was about to discover the real barrier was something she could not remove. The law. Sheriff Thomas Hayes stood beside my gate with the folder open in his hands. He didn't rush. He didn't react to Victoria's frustration. He simply read, page by page, the deed showing Mercer Ranch ownership, the 1968 survey identifying the road as private access, the developer agreement confirming Pine Ridge Estates had no access rights, the HOA letter signed by Victoria Caldwell demanding I remove my own gate. Then he looked at the photographs, the vehicles, the signs, the repeated entries. The evidence told a story that didn't need anyone to explain it. Victoria watched him carefully. She was waiting for the moment when someone in uniform would validate what she had been saying for months. But that moment never came. Sheriff Hayes closed the folder. Victoria, when did Pine Ridge Estates receive permission to use this road? She hesitated. We have established community use. He shook his head slightly. That's not what I asked. The silence returned. Because the question was simple, and simple questions are often the hardest ones to avoid. Who gave you permission? He asked. Victoria looked toward the homeowners standing behind her. Nobody answered. Because there was no answer. No signature, no easement, no agreement, no transfer of rights, only an assumption. And assumptions do not change property ownership. Rachel Morgan stepped forward. Victoria Caldwell and the HOA have repeatedly represented this road as community access, despite documented evidence showing otherwise. She handed Sheriff Hayes a copy of Linda Parker's internal records. Victoria immediately reacted. Those documents were taken out of context. Linda, who had arrived quietly behind the group, spoke for the first time. No, Victoria. They weren't. Everyone turned. Victoria's face changed. For the first time that morning, she looked genuinely surprised. Linda walked closer. I sat in those meetings. I saw those plans. I heard you say we needed Daniel's Road before Phase 2 could move forward. Victoria stared at her. You don't understand what you're talking about. Linda shook her head. I understand exactly what I heard. The power in the conversation shifted, not because someone spoke louder, because someone finally said the truth where everyone could hear it. Sheriff Hayes looked back at the documents. Is there anything showing this HOA owns this access route? Victoria didn't answer. Rachel did. No. Sheriff Hayes nodded. Then this is not a community road. Victoria stepped forward. You can't just close access that people have been using. Sheriff Hayes looked at her. Actually, if the property owner has never granted access, that's exactly what property rights are designed to protect. Those words hit harder than any argument, because Victoria had spent months convincing people that Daniel was unreasonable. But standing there in front of that sheriff, the question was no longer whether Daniel was being difficult. The question was whether Victoria had ever had the right to demand anything. And the answer was becoming obvious. One of the Pine Ridge residents stepped forward. Is it true the developer agreement said this road was private? She looked away. That was enough. People notice when someone stops answering. Another homeowner asked, Did you know before we started using it? Victoria's confidence started to crack. This is being exaggerated. Rachel looked at her. No. It is being documented. That sentence changed the atmosphere, because documentation had been Daniel's strategy from the beginning. While Victoria had been building a story, Daniel had been building a record. Every ignored sign, every vehicle, every demand, every statement, every document, all of it had been waiting for this moment. Sheriff Hayes returned the folder to me. Daniel, based on what I've seen, this gate stays where it is. Victoria immediately reacted. "You're taking his side?" The sheriff looked at her calmly. "No." A pause. "I'm recognizing the evidence." That was the difference. Daniel Mercer did not win because he had more influence. He did not win because he was louder. He won because the facts were finally standing in the same place as the people who had ignored them. The contractors began packing up. The HOA vehicles slowly turned around. The residents who arrived expecting a victory left quietly, and Victoria Caldwell remained standing near my gate. The same gate she had called an obstacle. The same gate she believed she could force open with enough pressure. Now it represented something completely different. A boundary that had finally been respected. But the legal fight was not finished. Rachel gathered the documents. "This isn't over." I looked at her. "I know. Today stopped the immediate access attempt, but we still need the court to permanently resolve ownership and damages." Victoria heard that, and for a moment, I saw the confidence return, because she still believed the courtroom would be different. She believed a judge might see things the way she did. She believed this could still be negotiated, but she didn't understand what was coming. The courthouse would not hear about popularity. It would not hear about convenience. It would not hear about what felt fair to Pine Ridge residents. It would hear about ownership, and ownership had never been on Victoria's side. 3 days later, Rachel filed the lawsuit. Caldwell versus Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The evidence was attached. The records were attached. The timeline was attached. And at the center of it all was the same question that started everything. Who owns the road? This time the answer would not come from an HOA meeting. It would come from a judge. And Victoria Caldwell was about to find out that a confident person can control a room. But they cannot control the truth. The courtroom was quieter than any HOA meeting Victoria had ever attended. No applause. No supportive comments. No neighbors agreeing with her version of events. Just documents, facts, and a judge who had no interest in who sounded more convincing. Judge Robert Mitchell sat at the front of the courtroom reviewing the case file. Behind him was the question that started everything. Who owned the road? For months, Victoria had convinced people that the answer was complicated, that there were gray areas, that community need mattered more than an old ranch boundary. But in court, gray areas disappear when the records are clear. Rachel Morgan stood beside me as the hearing began. She did not start with emotion. She started with the deed. "This property has been owned by the Mercer family for generations," she said. "The access road in question has always remained within those property boundaries." Then came the survey records. Michael Turner testified about the original county documentation. He explained how the road was identified as private Mercer Ranch access. No public easement, no shared access agreement, no transfer of rights. Then Rachel introduced the developer agreement, the document that changed everything. The agreement Pine Ridge Estates had signed before construction even began. The agreement acknowledging surrounding private properties. The agreement confirming that subdivision development did not create access rights across those properties. Victoria sat across the room. For the first time since this began, she was not leading the conversation. She was answering questions. Her attorney argued that residents had used the road for months, that the community had come to rely on it, that removing access would create inconvenience. But Judge Mitchell stopped him. "Reliance does not establish ownership." The room went silent, because that was the entire case. Victoria had built everything around the idea that if enough people wanted something, the law would eventually make room for them. But property rights did not work that way. Rachel then presented the HOA records Linda Parker provided. Meeting notes, internal emails, planning documents. The phrase that mattered most: secure Mercer access before next phase approval. Judge Mitchell read it carefully. Then he looked up. "Who authorized the use of this property?" Victoria's attorney paused. Your Honor, the HOA believed access rights existed. Judge Mitchell looked back at the document. That does not answer my question. Again, the room became quiet, because there was no answer, no person, no agreement, no signature, nothing, only a belief. And beliefs do not create ownership. Linda Parker testified next. She explained how Victoria pushed the access issue internally, how the road was discussed as part of future development plans, how residents were encouraged to use the route before any legal right existed. Victoria's attorney attempted to challenge her credibility. You are a former HOA board member, correct? Linda nodded. Yes. And you disagreed with President Caldwell? I disagreed with breaking rules because someone wanted a faster result. The answer was simple, but it carried weight, because this was never about personalities. It was about choices. Judge Mitchell reviewed the evidence over several days. Then the final hearing arrived. I sat in that courtroom thinking about the road, not the lawsuit, not Victoria, the road. The same road my grandfather built by hand. The same road my father maintained. The same road that had carried generations of Mercer family work. It was never just dirt and gravel. It was proof that something built with patience could survive someone else's impatience. Judge Mitchell delivered the ruling on a Tuesday morning. The court found that Mercer Ranch held exclusive ownership of the private access road. Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association had no legal authority over the property. The HOA's access claims were rejected. The court ordered compensation for documented damages caused by unauthorized use. And most importantly, the court permanently confirmed the boundary. The road belonged to Mercer Ranch. Victoria Caldwell sat quietly as the decision was read. The woman who once stood at my fence telling me my land was inconvenient now had to accept the one thing she had refused to recognize: a boundary. After the ruling, Pine Ridge Estates changed quickly. Residents learned the full story. They saw the documents. They saw the internal records. They understood that the shortcut they had been promised was never theirs to use. Victoria resigned as HOA president within weeks. The community elected a new board. Linda Parker stayed involved, this time making sure decisions were based on records instead of assumptions. Months later, I repaired the damage along the ranch road. The tire marks disappeared, the worn grass grew back, the fence lines were restored, and the old gate stood exactly where it had always stood. Not as a symbol of conflict, as a reminder that some things are worth protecting. One evening, a family from Pine Ridge stopped by. They brought a pie and apologized for what had happened. They told me they had believed Victoria because they trusted her. I understood. Not everyone who follows a bad decision understands where it leads. I invited them to see the ranch. Their kids watched the cattle from the fence line. They asked questions about the land, about farming, about the old road. And for the first time in a long time, the road connected neighbors the way it was supposed to. Not through entitlement, through respect. That was the ending Victoria never expected. She thought the battle was about forcing a gate open. But the gate was never the important part. The important part was proving that ownership still meant something, that documents still mattered, that patience was not weakness, and that a person who protects what belongs to them does not need to shout. They only need the truth, because someone can build a bigger house, a taller fence, or a louder voice. But nobody can build ownership where the law says it does not exist.
The lesson Daniel's story leaves us with is that protecting what belongs to you does not always require the loudest argument. Sometimes it requires patience, recourse, and the willingness to let the truth speak for itself. Daniel did not win by fighting louder than Victoria Caldwell. He protected his family's ranch by documenting what happened, respecting the legal process, and standing firm when pressure came from people who believed that had authority they did not have. The reminder is simple: land Boundaries and promises matter because they represent the work and history of the people who came before us. Justice is often quiet and patient, but it becomes stronger when it is supported by fact and integrity. If you ever deal with a situation where someone ignored your boundaries or you had to stand your ground respectfully, share your story in the comments or simply type yes if you believe patience and honesty still matters. And if you enjoy stories about ranches, land rights, and ordinary people rotating what they build, consider subscribing to the channel. Stay with us for more HOA, property, and land story where courage comes from doing what is right.